public accounting was completely new for me. And what I hadn't figured out was how to really pace myself.
Hello! You are listening to CPA Career Path Podcast with Rosie Flaherty, CPA MSA. This is episode number 57. We have a special guest, Terrell Turner, CPA, a business leader, content creator, and co-founder of TL Turner Group, known for his impactful insights and engaging business talk library platform. This episode will cover Terrell's journey from college to EY, audit versus tax, key lessons, and transitioning to private accounting. This episode is proudly sponsored by Chapman University's Achievers College of Business and Economics, located in beautiful sunny Southern California. Are you thinking about pursuing a master's in accounting? Chapman's MSA program is tailored for ambitious professionals like you. With intimate class size and a collaborative atmosphere, you will receive personalized attention from world-class faculty who bring extensive industry expertise to the classroom. Enhance your accounting skills, fulfill CPA license requirements, and elevate your career with Chapman's flexible MSA program. Discover more and apply today at chapman.edu/MSA. Terrell, thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's so exciting because I met Terrell at AICPA Engage I believe in 2023. And we had an amazing conversation. And after that, I followed Terrell on LinkedIn, and I'm like a huge fan of all his posts and then funny videos. He has a lot of short videos. The first 1 or 2 seconds, you always catch my attention with like some funny reaction. I say, this is so smart. So I'm very excited for the interview today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad you enjoy those, because we really tried to work on finding a way to make learning about like business, accounting a little more entertaining. And I'm a huge believer that I think there are so many, wonderful lessons that we can learn from like everyday events and stuff like that. So I'm glad that you find those to be entertaining and helpful.
It is very entertaining and it is very helpful as well. That's for sure. And before we go further in the journey, can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my background is accounting and finance, probably like many people who in your audience. Like I went to undergrad, went to grad school. I sat for the CPA exam, worked for a Big Four accounting firm and for a few years. And then after that, I left and started working for Fortune 100 companies, some pretty large companies in different roles, from engineering, finance to investor relations and FP&A, using all of my amazing accounting and finance skills, and did that for several, probably 12 plus years before deciding that I wanted to branch off to start my own firm. And started my own firm in 2020. So April 1st of 2020. So like as everything was shutting down for the pandemic, that's when I started my business and had to figure it out, and, really just got very creative. And that's where I started creating all this content and really found a way to use content to not only build my business, but to help the profession and to also build a brand within the accounting and legal and business communities, and just been really maximizing that and trying to make the most of the opportunity.
That's amazing. I love how you find a great combination. Back to very beginning, when you were in the college and you picked the accounting, did you choose both accounting and finance or just only accounting?
So I went just with accounting because at my undergraduate school, we didn't really have like an accounting degree or finance degree. It's like we had a business degree, but you could emphasize in accounting or finance. And me personally, like I didn't want to really go the hardcore finance and banking route. I really wanted to own my own business someday. And what I was told is, well, if you want to own your own business, you have to understand the numbers. And so I went into accounting because I was like, okay, accounting is the language of business. At some point, if I'm going to own or run a business, I got to know the numbers. And so I decided to focus on accounting, which I'm so glad that I did, because I had no idea that accounting was also going to allow me to start doing corporate finance roles. But I feel like if I would have went directly in finance, I would not have had the opportunities that I did have.
Yeah, and when I look at your career path, it looks like you start in private accounting first as staff accountant before you start working at EY.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to, um, my school didn't require you to have an internship to graduate, but I had gotten some advice that, hey, it's probably a good idea to get an internship. So I interned I got my first like work experience in accounting, like at a local accounting firm. And to be honest, I wasn't even doing accounting there. They hired me to work literally in the mailroom. So what I would do is and it was an older tax firm. So during tax season, I would get in my car, I would get an envelope, and I would drive the envelope to the client and get the client to sign the documents, and then I would bring it back. And then I was updating files in the file cabinet. So I was not doing accounting work at all. But it did get me close enough to see like what happens during busy season. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to be a tax person. Um, and then I was like, but I do want to get some actual accounting experience. So I got another internship with a local manufacturing company where I went to school. And I was only supposed to work there, like the internship was only going to be one semester. And so I had done such a good job that they offered me a part-time job to stay on. So after my internship was over, they offered me a part-time job. So I went to school during the mornings, and then the afternoons I would go over to my part-time accounting job and I would work on accounting. That's where I learned how to do like month end close and to do actual inventory accounting and accounts payable, AR. And so I got to actually use what I was learning in the classroom. Like I got to see how it worked in the real world, which for me, it also helped because I didn't have to study in school as much because I'm actually doing it on a day to day. So I didn't have to like and sometimes like my professors knew I wasn't studying um, because like my professor would be like, Terrell, you need to study. And I'm like, why? I'm actually doing this at work. like, and so for me, that's how I kind of got my start in actually working as a staff accountant before I even graduated and went into public accounting.
Ooh, interesting. Because normally people could advise you go to public first. So you have like to see the big picture of accounting. And then you go to private when you narrow your niche. And then you focus on what you want to work on. But you are a little bit different that you had an opportunity to start in private first. And you understand more about the bookkeeping concept, more about the accounting theories. How did you feel when you start working at EY, when you already had some experience under your belt?
Yeah, so I will say when you go into public accounting, because I was on the audit side, so when I got to EY, it was very regimented, meaning like there were processes for every type of audit. Like I understood the accounting concepts in theory, but I didn't know how to actually audit, inventory accounting. Like that part of it I had to learn because I understood like after maybe 6 months, I would say that's where my prior experience really started to help me because the first 6 months at EY, I was really trying to wrap my mind around the processes and how do you go through an audit program, like what type of documentation is sufficient and like learning EY's process. And I would say after 6 months, then I was able to actually use my prior knowledge because and when I was at EY, I ended up doing a lot of inventory accounting. And so after 6 months, I learned the EY processes, but then I'm like, yeah, I've done this inventory accounting from the other side, like as a staff accountant. So it's like I knew what to look for. I kind of knew what questions to ask. And I knew how the accounting worked if I were the person doing it. And so that gave me a chance to see both sides of it. And, I guess you'd say, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess the word got out because I ended up doing a ton of inventory accounting, for several EY clients in the office that I was at.
Yeah, I remember when I moved from private accounting to public accounting, I had the same experience. I was auditing the work that I did in the past. That's how I feel like. I was like, yeah, I know exactly the answer that you're going to ask them, why they do this and why they do that in the office. So that was a very fun experience, but interesting to me that I worked in private and then I moved to audit and I did not like that. And you had experience to see how tax people work and you did not like that. But I moved to tax and I love it. So it's interesting how opposite it is when we both move from private to public and then work in audit. That's really fun. Yeah.
Now, I will say, if I would have gone into tax, maybe at Big Four, I probably would have had a different experience because my exposure to tax was at a small firm in a very small town. And it was a small town where I went to college. And so they were doing a lot of individual tax return. There were some business returns like, the dentist, the doctor's office. And the way they worked at that firm, it was, the partner would work on the tax return or the senior associate work on the tax return. And everybody kind of worked in their own, either at their own desk or in their own office. There really wasn't much interaction. And it was a very individual type of experience. And so for me, I thought if that's what it's like working in tax, meaning you literally just shut yourself off from everybody else and you bury yourself into the documents, I'm like, yeah, I wanted more interaction with other people. But when I got to Big Four, I would talk to different people who are on the tax side, and they showed me that it was a little different, but my mind was already made up by that point.
You I already made the decision. I'm not going to change it. That's interesting because when I chose audit, the moment I moved to public, I chose audit for the same reason because I want more interactions. I want more travel experience. I want more variety of different levels within the firms when we do audit. But then when I had that experience, even the fact that I'm an extrovert, I feel like it was not for me. So I was confused. Like people told me that I'm an extrovert and audit is perfect for me, but it's not. So you cannot identify introvert or extrovert to be audit or tax. That's what I guess. But I moved to tax and I love it. I love it a lot.
Nice. Awesome. Now I'm curious as to what was one of the first things that you really enjoyed about tax?
You know what? It's interesting you said people work individually in tax and you don't like that. I actually like that. And the fact that I can finish the whole return by myself, I really enjoy that. I feel like I figured out I see the whole big picture. And then I try to figure out the puzzle in that picture. But for audit, when I had experience at the first year in audit, I just audit at cash only. I can audit just only account receivable. I didn't have a chance to audit the full client from beginning to the end until probably almost the end of the first year that they give me small client and I can audit from beginning to the end. And then when I had a chance and I was but there was nothing for me to audit that much because for that kind of client, they are so simple. You didn't have much work to do. So when I moved to tax, I was I really enjoy doing, even if it's a little bit complex return, you still do from beginning to the end, except it's extremely large. And then you have a group of people to work on. But yeah, that's the reason. But I love talking to people. I love going out and see people, but I love working individually. So there's a conflict.
And I think that's a good thing that a lot of people kind of struggle with sometimes when they go into accounting, because I think there are a lot of people who've been told like, oh, you're an introvert, you're gonna like doing this type of job, and I don't think it's that straightforward of like, hey, you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, you're gonna like this, you're gonna like this, because I think you also have to weigh in like things like that. Like some people, they like being able to work on something from start to finish. They like to know that, hey, what I started, we're going to be able to wrap this up. Then there are others who thrive, like for myself, like I really enjoy working in the team environment. Like I enjoy working on things that are too big for me to do by myself. And which means I got to work in a team and I got to work with some cooperation. And I think some of that for me goes back to growing up in a military environment, to where my father was in the military, my grandfather, one of my brothers went in the military, uncles, my godfather. So it's like I grew up around a military environment, and every mission in the military is too big for one person to do. And so you just get used to this, collaboration. And I have 3 older brothers. So it's like I got used to living in this, environment of constant collaboration, to where that's just like, that's the type of situation I thrive in. So I enjoy audit more than what I saw in the tax, because I'm like, an audit is too much for one person to do. And you got to use that collaboration, that teamwork to get to the finish line.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting when you mentioned about military, because my first impression when I saw you back in 2023, I thought you had some kind of experience in military as well. And then I was like, no, look at your history of work. I didn't see any years you spent in military at all. And I was like, that's interesting. But now it made sense that you grew up in the military family. I can see the way. I feel like people in military, they are very sharp. They get things done, and they really focused on the end result. So I think it's worked perfectly for audits and how I feel. But talking about that, I want to emphasize that it doesn't mean tax people do not like collaboration. We do have collaboration. We do work with a team, just in a different way. So I just want to throw it out that people don't misunderstand that only audit people get collaboration and teamwork. No, it's not. Tax people do the same, just in different way. You mentioned that you work in public accounting at EY as audit, and you worked there for 2 years and a half. What was the best lesson you learned in those years at EY?
I think for me, it was learning to pace myself, because at the time, I had no really experience in, working a professional job. Like I said, I came from a military background. Like no one in my family had really gone to college to pursue a professional path. Like when I got to college, by the time I got to my junior year, no one in my family had ever graduated from college. Now, during my sophomore year, my father went back to college after 20-something years, and he and I literally graduated 7 days apart. Like he graduated the Saturday before I did. So other than my father, no one else in my immediate family had, or even extended family, had a college education. So when I went into, public accounting, it was all new for me. And so a lot of that was me just really learning and getting a chance to really understand. And so public accounting was completely new for me. And what I hadn't figured out was how to really pace myself, because, like I say, fortunately or unfortunately, I was on clients to where they had different year ends. So it was like I was in constant busy season, to where I gotten to one point where like I was just absolutely exhausted, but I didn't understand what was going on, to where I'm just like, man, I would say I was on one audit engagement and it wasn't my best performance. And I could tell because there was some stuff that I knew that for some reason it's like I just wasn't getting it done, and I couldn't tell that I was just absolutely exhausted. I mean, when you go from, the year-end busy season to then jumping on a client who has a June 30th year end, and then jumping on a client who has a September 30th year end, and you're just going constantly like that. I mean, it really wears you out. And I never knew how to like understand that, to really pace myself to be able to go back to, the senior manager and be able to say like, hey, I've been in, 4 clients all have, consecutive year ends. Like, I actually don't need to be on this client, or, hey, can I get moved to a different client? Like, I had to learn how to be able to speak up for myself and understand that, to be able to think strategically. And also, I mean, it was in the best interest of the firm for me not to be in constant busy season, because if I was constantly going, I was going to eventually start making mistakes. And so I had to learn that. And unfortunately, like I said, I learned it the hard way of going through it. But I would say that's probably one of my biggest lessons I had to learn.
I feel like a lot of people go through the same. They work so hard in public accounting, go through one busy season to another busy season, and then just cannot say no, and they just get burned out and move to private accounting. Unfortunately, that's happened a lot. But I feel like a lot of CPA firms, they try to fix that. They try to limit the maximum of, I would say, like reduce the minimum billable hours during busy season. However, when jobs come, you still need to take what it takes to get the job done. So sometimes you probably have to work more than the hours that you feel like you can work. So that's the thing I want to ask. Do you think that with that pacing yourself, that is such a great lesson for you in public accounting? Do you think that that's something that people now with technology, it's easier for them to do so?
Yeah, I think that it's easier to find alternatives and adjustments. But I think for a lot of people, being able to recognize that, and I think for me it was being able to have that healthy discussion with the senior manager, because I think I had the mindset of like, hey, if they ask me to do something, then I'm just going to give it my all and I'm just going to keep going. But I think just being able to be aware of like, hey, you know what, maybe I can ask for, like, instead of me driving home, like working late, all week long, and then driving home for 2 hours on the weekend, maybe I can just ask the firm if I can just stay here for the weekend, and it will save me, that 4 hours of commuting, and I can just use that time to kind of disconnect and relax a little bit more. And I think it's just learning to think about like alternatives. And so I will say, with, the advancement of technology, now you can do your job remotely, to where there were a couple times where I was working on a client that may have been about 3 hours away. So it was just under what, the requirement for flying. So it's like, when you consider driving 3 hours after you've been working late all week, it's just like, it just wears you down. You get home long enough to do laundry and then pack it up again and get right back in the car and drive back, to where I think now with technology, like, maybe you don't have to be there on site the entire time, to where I think you can manage getting your work done and still doing an excellent job, but you can cut out like the 3-hour commute both ways or something like that. And I think if you can figure out a way to leverage technology to still get the job done and still do an excellent job, but to cut out some of the commute time, or to cut out some of the, the non, I guess you say, essential task related to getting your job done.
But you mentioned initially at the beginning of the discussion that you don't like tax people sitting at the desk and do the job by themselves, by themselves only. So now you work remotely. You literally just at your desk by yourself. It's just the same concept. Why you like working remotely by yourself better than actually task people to sit on their desk and work on their stuff by themselves? What's the difference?
Yeah, and I think it's more of using it as a hybrid approach to where, like, I would say if someone's in public accounting, let's say, you're commuting to go to, your client. So for me, when I was in public accounting, I had maybe one or two clients that were in the town that I actually lived in. All of my other clients were outside of the city that I lived in. So it's like I was always commuting to where, when you think about like your personal relationships or spending time with your family and stuff like that, if you're always on the road, you're always in a hotel, it's like you miss out on, some of those family things and some of those things that for some people, like that becomes essential for them having, them being whole in like their personal lives and stuff like that, to where if you have the ability to have more of a hybrid, like, hey, I want to spend this time, the weekend with my family without having to cut it short, to where, hey, can I work remotely on Monday, Tuesday, and then I'll be on the client site on Wednesday? Because a lot of the work we were doing is we would go to the client site and then the client would show us the audit room. We would sit in the audit room. We'd do our work until 5 o'clock or till 7 o'clock. And then we leave and go to the hotel, come back, we go right back to the audit room and not really interact with people. And I'm like, well, some of that stuff I could probably do remotely from home and then go on site. Is kind of a mix of a hybrid. Because I will say for myself, like even now in my own firm, like everything we do is remote. And I do have to be intentional about creating that environment for my staff to be able to connect with one another so that they don't feel like they're just sitting at their own computer and they're just not interacting with other people. I think it's more of a hybrid approach of mixing it up. From some of the work we do, it is good to just, be at your desk and work. And then other times it's like, hey, how do we emphasize that interaction when necessary?
I see. That makes sense. And is that you mentioned about spending time with family, have some time for yourself in your life. And is that because of those reasons you moved from public accounting to private, that you left EY?
Well, during the time that I was at EY, I mean, it was during, the Great Recession, and several of my major clients were real estate clients. And at that time, when the real estate market completely tanked and they filed for bankruptcy. So at the time, the EY office that I was in was trying to build a, real estate portfolio. And when most of your clients file for bankruptcy, the firm had to make some cuts. And because more of my clients were the ones that filed for bankruptcy, when I was laid off from EY, and I would say within 3 weeks, I found another job, to which it's like I completely understood why EY had to make the decision, because although I was in accounting, I always thought like I was running my own business. And I'm like, I completely understand. My major clients just filed for bankruptcy, and when you file for bankruptcy, sometimes when the case goes to the court, the judge will assign, the distribution of assets, or there'll be some type of settlement where the judge may assign them to, different, different auditors and stuff like that. And the EY just did not re-win the engagement. So my departure from EY was as a result of the Great Recession and losing the firm, losing the real estate clients.
Wow. So how did you adapt yourself working from public to private for the next job after EY?
Yeah, so the immediate job that I took, like within 3 weeks, I got a job at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they needed, it was a contract a contract project job, because I think the federal government had canceled a major like contract, and so they needed someone to come in and audit claims where people were saying that, hey, the cancellation of this contract negatively impacted my business. So they would submit a claim to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and my job was to audit their claim and then make an assessment on like, hey, based on what we audited, here's the damages that we think that they suffered as a result of this cancellation. So it was still somewhat audit for about 6 months, and then I applied for a manufacturing job for a private company. And when I went in for the job, the biggest thing that the controller said they had an issue with was inventory accounting. And I had done a lot of inventory accounting in like my first year or first year and a half at EY. So I was like, well, yeah, I understand inventory accounting, and I had done it in college as well. So when I started working there, the good thing is I was working in a accounting matter that I really knew and understood. So it was a little easier for me to get up to speed professionally. But I would say work environment wise, like that was a new one. I mean, working in a manufacturing environment in accounting, like, most of the people there are not going to be accountants. Whereas like when you work in public accounting, just about everybody's an accountant.
Yep.
But but when you work in a manufacturing organization, less than 10% of the people there are in accounting. And so there you really start to learn a lot about engineering. You start to learn about supply chain and logistics. And I really started to learn about the non-finance and accounting aspects that it takes to run a business. And so for me, that was good because I got to get outside of the accounting bubble to start learning operations more.